But John 1:18 and 1 Timothy 6:16 both say that no one has ever seen God. So if these verses are true, then these are false, and vice versa.
Such silly objections.
All right, let's see it. And the fit today is Spawn, one of my favorite characters, but drawn by one of my least favorite pencilers.
Yes, like in Genesis and Exodus, when God had shown his face to Jacob and Moses, what that's referring to, if you look into the Hebrew, is God had shown a piece of his glory to Jacob and Moses.
There is absolutely nothing whatsoever in the Hebrew that in any way, shape, or form qualifies these encounters. In Genesis 32:30, the text just explains that Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, explaining that I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. And the saying face to face is the construction panim el panim, which literally means face to face and always refers to direct in-person face-to-face contact. And then in Exodus 33:11, we have the narrator saying that Moses would speak to God panim el panim, face to face. There is absolutely nothing in the Hebrew that suggests it is anything other than direct in-person face-to-face contact. The notion that this must refer to a piece of glory has nothing to do with the Hebrew. It has to do with presupposing the univocality of all these texts and ginning up some kind of rationalization for how one part of the text can say Jacob and Moses speak with God face to face directly. Moses sees God's form, and another part of the text, and specifically Exodus 33:20, can have God saying to Moses, "You will not see my face because no one can see me and live." And if you approach this critically, it's clearly just different sources operating with different traditions about God's visibility. And one is presenting Jacob and Moses as exceptions to the rule, as people who can see God's face, and that's why Jacob and others express fear and shock at having seen God and somehow survived. Whereas in Exodus 33:20, the source is saying, no, not even Moses gets to do that. And then the tradition of God's visibility develops even more. So by the time we get to the New Testament, there's this notion that you cannot see God at all, and there are no exceptions. And the authors of the New Testament and early Christianity have their own ways to rationalize all this. But underlying all of it is the fact that these are different authors writing in different time periods based on different ideologies and different beliefs. So the texts absolutely conflict with each other.
However, when the Bible says that no one has ever seen God, what it's saying is no one has ever beheld the full glory of God, because we cannot behold the full glory of God because we would cease to exist.
So this argument is an example of a fallacy known as begging the question, and that is where you construct an argument for a conclusion that only works if you already presuppose the conclusion. If you don't presuppose the conclusion, the argument just falls apart. And here's why that's what's going on in this argument. This creator is saying, well, they didn't see all of God's glory, they only saw a part of it. But none of these texts says anything at all about glory. It just says somebody spoke with God panim el panim, face to face. Where does it talk about glory? Well, it talks about it in Exodus 33:20, where Moses says to God, show me your glory. And God says, tell you what, I'll cover your face with my hand, and I'll pass by, and then I'll take my hand away. And you'll see my back, but you won't see my face, because no one can see me and live. And this creator is going to say, that's the governing verse. So I'm going to center and give priority to this verse. I'm going to presuppose univocality. I'm going to presuppose that these texts can't disagree, and then I can subordinate Genesis 32:30 and Exodus 33:11 to Exodus 33:20. And since Exodus 33:20 is true and is the verse that is in charge, then the other texts have to be reinterpreted in light of Exodus 33:20. But Exodus 33:20 is widely agreed by scholars to come from a different source from Exodus 33:11. Different authors writing in different time periods to different audiences for different reasons. And so you can only subordinate Genesis 32:30 and Exodus 33:11 to Exodus 33:20's comments about glory if you presuppose univocality. And so the original claim is that these texts contradict, The texts are not univocal. And this creator is saying, but as long as we presuppose that they are univocal, we can come up with an explanation for how they are univocal. And that is just obliviously and flagrantly begging the question,